Novus, the new voice. Vox Novus, the new dimension. Vox Novus, thought and movement leaders who will share from their experience and offer tools to help us navigate our rapidly changing world. My name is Victor Fuhrman. Welcome to Vox Novus, the new voice. The lessons learned in high school are often more than higher education. They involve socialization, adulting, personal responsibility, and personal values. What happens when two friends take divergent paths and a tragedy awakens one to the truth of these values? My guest this week on Vox Novus, Jeffery Young, shares the fictionalized story of two young women he attended high school with and the tragedy that led to transformation. Jeffery Young is an award-winning writer and Army veteran whose multifaceted career has included work in the culinary field and the newspaper industry. Jeffery holds degrees in communications and criminal justice, and his work with AmVets California garnered the interest of President Ronald Regan. He's the author of the book Tales Out of Church, which is a collection of short stories told by an over-imaginative Catholic priest. He joins me this week to share his heartwarming and redemptive book, Beth, Legacy of Love. Please join me in welcoming to Vox Novus Jeffery Young. Welcome, Jeff.
Well, thank you for having me. This is such a pleasure.
Jeff, please tell us about your path and how it led to the spiritually centered writing that you share.
Well, in all honesty, it started as a young boy down in Sarasota, Florida. I used to go to a church called the Osprey Church of God. And at 10 years old, I joined the church youth group, and basically I was surrounded by a lot of older kids who were ranging from 16 to 18. And through them, I really got a great taste of a movement that was going on in America at the time. They called it the Jesus Revolution. And this was a spiritual movement among young Christians that were being evangelized, and they were witnessing and experiencing Christ in a personal way. And I had an opportunity to be right in the center of this, and it was a marvelous and incredible experience that changed my life. It really did, and it's something that has been following me through thick and thin, pain and sorrow and joys, and that's how I got started.
Now, we have an interfaith audience, people of virtually almost every faith. Just explain to them what that meant to you at that time.
Well, what it meant to me, basically, it was developing a understanding of something that was more of a humdrum, because we always went to church every Sunday. And in all honesty, my dad sometimes had to make us get up to go to church. But then when I understood just what a blessing it was to be able to go to church and to pray and to worship God, it just became something that I couldn't get enough of. I started to look forward to Sundays, and by the time I was 12 and 13, I was the first one in the car to go. And we had Jesus rallies that were phenomenal, and I was with other kids who were going through many of the very same things. And I saw people who were suffering things that I had never imagined. You know, they were suffering drug addiction and teenage pregnancy and trouble at home with their parents. And I saw these kids come involved with Christ and with a personal relationship. Suddenly I saw them become different. And then their parents started to come. And then we saw homes being repaired. And for a young kid to see these things, it was mind boggling. It really was. It was like magic. Now, from an interfaith standpoint, I don't want to, you know, alienate or ostracize people who might be Jewish or Muslim or of some other tradition. But from my own experience, Christianity worked for me because of the fact that I was able to develop that personal relationship. And that's what has influenced my writings. I can't think of writing anything else unless it involves telling people about Jesus and how wonderful he was in my life.
And before writing your books, what else did you do on your career path?
Well, I grew up in Sarasota, Florida, and the only industry that was available for basically unskilled labor. After I got out of the Army, I went into the Army right after high school. And after I got out of the Army, I went back home and I went to work for some Greek friends of mine who owned a restaurant called Grapevine. And it was steak and seafood, and they taught me how to cook and how to run the restaurant. And after a while, I worked my way up to management, and they brought me into their family basically as a family member. And I learned to speak Greek, and it was really amazing. But by the time I reached 30, uh, I'd already moved out to California, and I worked in the restaurant business there, and that was where I got involved in AmVets in my free time. And I did that until 1989. And then we moved to Chattanooga, Tennessee, and I became involved in the production of yarn. And I worked in a yarn plant for about 7.5 years. And then I went to work for the Chattanooga Times Free Press in their mailroom running their inserting machines. And I did that until about 2005, and then I went back to college and I got my degree in public administration and in criminal justice.
Wonderful. So you had a very varied career.
Yes, sir, that's correct. I really did. It was kind of haphazard, but as I look back on it, it's like the Lord tied everything together. If it weren't for the fact that I went into the Army directly after high school, I wouldn't have been able to qualify for VA benefits and things like that. And if I hadn't have been able to learn to speak Greek, I wouldn't have done so well in the restaurant business. And then having worked in the yarn business and also working eventually for the local newspaper here, I just saw everything move together, and it really wasn't a patchwork quilt. It was a steady, plotted line that I had no idea, but there were a lot of plans that were being made that led up to the writing of my book.
Please tell us a little about your work on behalf of AmVets of California.
Well, I certainly will. AmVets was a wonderful organization, and I'd always wanted to belong, but at the time, I was very young, really. I was in my 20s, and I was 26 years old, as a matter of fact. And I wanted to form a group called the Military Action Council, which was going to be a group that worked on behalf of veterans, and they were going to get involved in political activities and things like that. And I made mention of that to a buddy of mine, who lived next door to us, and he was a retired ex-Marine. This was in San Diego, and he told me about AmVets, and he said that American veterans accepts young people like you, and you can become involved with them. And so I got a hold of their district leader, and he said that they didn't have a chapter where I lived, and he was wondering if I would like to take command of that area. And I considered that a direct order, and I did. I went about going from wherever I could find veterans, getting names, addresses, and it was incredible. And finally, I managed to get together 12 lovely souls, all veterans, who wanted to work with me, and we became more than just uh, military comrades. We became a family, and we did everything together. And it was through the AMVETS that I met my wife. Uh, and that was a blessing. As a matter of fact, she was the one who typed up my book so that I could have it in a um, logical form to send it to the publishers. So I worked for them, and I met Ronald Reagan, and that was an incredible experience. It was such an honor to meet a president of the United States, and I helped to work to turn around a lot of lives, and it was funny because of the fact that AMVETS became kind of an extension of a quasi evangelism, because military people suffer from all sorts of ailments: alcoholism, drug abuse, PTSD, and you know all kinds of afflictions. And most of it is they really need to have their buddy, their army buddy or navy buddy or air force buddy with them to work with them. And so that's what I became. I became their confidant as well as their commander, and they
Well,
could trust me.
thank you so much for your active duty service and also your wonderful work with AmVets of California. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir. And it was such an honor to be able to do it. I should really be thanking the American people and the Army for giving me the opportunity to do that. That's a debt I can't repay. Not even if I were to die today for this country, I could not repay that debt.
Well, that's a beautiful and inspired statement. Thank you so much for that. Let me ask you this. Your book is called Beth, Legacy of Love. What inspired you to write the book?
Well, what happened was while I was in high school, I went into high school like every other kid. You go in, and that's a transitional time for young people, because you sort of get out of the tweens and you start developing into a young adult, relationships with other people, and you begin to discover all sorts of new things. And during this period of discovery, I joined the speech club, and I wanted to get involved in oratory because at that time I had thoughts of maybe going to law school and becoming a lawyer. And so I joined this club, and I met this beautiful young girl named Tracy Ross. And it was so funny. When I first met her, I never thought that my name would forever be attached to hers. First of all, because she was incredibly beautiful. Second of all, because girls in her caliber and in her ranking in high school, she was at the top, and people like me were used for food. You
Oh,
know, that was it. She was just so incredible, and she wasn't a snob. She was just a wonderful girl, and everybody really liked her, and she was very popular. And during her senior year, she contracted spinal meningitis and died. And her death was just so overwhelming. It was like the entire school took it personally. But not only that, the entire community took it personally. All of Sarasota, Florida, the mayor himself ordered flags to be lowered to half staff in honor of this 17-year-old girl. And the school had their flags at half staff. And the student body was so moved that they got together and they formed a scholarship fund in her name. And the scholarship fund was to be a college fund and also a fund that granted free membership to 10 underprivileged children. Well, since that time, the scholarship has continued, but right now it is dedicated to young people that have pulled themselves up from terrible circumstances, and they've gotten control of their lives and they've gone on to success. And it is just totally inspiring. And I had an opportunity to meet Tracy's parents, and I told them what I was doing. And at that time, I was just a young 17-year-old boy. Like I said, I didn't float in Tracy's circle, so I'd never been to her house. Well, her parents were so kind and so open with me that they actually let me take pictures of the inside of their house because I was going to go into the army and I wanted to continue to work on my book while I was in there. And I wanted to set the scenes in my book in her house. And so they let me do that. And right now it is so incredible because I was able to finally give them a published book. And they told me, they said, you know, Jeff, for years we thought that all of this was dead and buried, but you've given us our daughter back to us.
oh, that's so wonderful.
It is. I told him, I said, you know something, if I don't make a single dime for this book, you've given me all the gold in the world. And just saying that, they said that I gave their daughter back to them. And I don't know.
That's just beautiful because you memorialized her. I understand there's an interesting story also behind the cover photo.
There certainly is. As a matter of fact, you know, for those of us who understand the workings of the Lord and how things seem to happen quite miraculously, this is one of them. While I was in high school, I was involved with the student publication, The Rampage, and I was also the student assistant to the advisor for the paper. Well, anyway, while I was in this capacity, Tracy had died, and I happened to be in the library shortly afterward, and I saw this picture of Tracy, and it seemed to say, "Write about me." And the picture just stood out at me. It just seemed to. I couldn't get my eye off of it, and so I was driving at the time, and I drove all over Sarasota looking for a copy of this paper. Well, the paper was a small independent paper called the Sarasota Journal. And at that time, it had a circulation of about 1,200 papers, and it was an evening paper. And so getting a copy of it from like a vendor or something like that was totally impossible. And so I thought, well, I'll never be able to get that picture. And so, I pretty much gave up on it. Well, I went to school the next day, and I was greeted by the advisor of the paper. She said, Jeff, I hate to tell you this, but the school has decided that they want to have a scrapbook of some kind. And since we do the paper, they wanted us to do it. And since most everybody else on staff is involved in putting the next issue to bed, we were wondering if you could probably get a start on it for us. And I said, well, all right, I'll go ahead and do it. She said, well, good. Go to the library and tell Mrs. Tatum that you're there, and she'll take you where you need to go. So, well, anyway, I went into the library. I introduced myself to Mrs. Tatum, told her what I was doing there. She took me into this back room in the back of the library where they had stacks of newspaper, and right on top of that stack was that paper with Tracy's picture, the one I'd
Oh,
seen in the library, right
oh,
there on top. And I asked Miss Tatum, I said, is there a possibility I can have some of these articles if I see any that I like? She said, oh, yeah, sure. Go ahead. Help yourself. So there it was. And that picture, I cut it out. I took it home. I laminated it. And I kept it with me. And during the process of writing Beth, I used that picture. And that picture told me, one day put me on the cover.
wow.
And I did. And I have that picture to this day. I have it with 6 inches from me right now.
Wonderful. Wonderful. My guest is Jeffery Young. He's the author of Beth, Legacy of Love. Jeff, please tell our listeners how they can get your book and find out more about you.
Well, they can get the book at Amazon.com. And if they Google Beth, A Legacy of Love, they'll find about 12 different listings for how they can get the book from various vendors. I'm very proud to say that they can get the book from vendors from all over the world. As a matter of fact, I happened to see that there was one in Afghanistan not very long ago, and also a vendor in Indonesia was carrying it because I didn't understand any of the writings. But that's the way to do it. It's also on iTunes and iPod. And like I said, if they'll just Google Beth, A Legacy of Love, there it is. Amazon is probably the best way to do it. And also they can get it on Kindle too.
Absolutely.
And I believe it's for like $8. It's $22 if you want it in the regular paperback cover copy, and it's $8 if you want to get it on Kindle.
And we will be back with more of Jeffery Young and Beth, Legacy of Love, after these words on the OMTimes radio network.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, OMTimes Radio, IOM-FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week is Jeffery Young. We're talking about his book, Beth, Legacy of Love. Now, Tracy Ross was her real name, but you named her Beth and you kind of fictionalized the story. Why did you do that?
Well, basically, it was out of compassion for, first of all, for Tracy and her family, and also for my fellow students. I didn't want to create a story that would rub salt into open wounds or that would cause anyone harm or distress. Like I said, this has been an act of love, not of violence, not of monetary uh, endeavors. This was an act of love. It's a love letter. It's a love letter to Tracy. It's a love letter to her parents. And so when I started the project, I wanted to use familiar names, and I wanted to use composites, especially when I was expressing ideas of faith and things of that nature. As a matter of fact, one of the key people who is a namesake, I don't know if you know Josh Kaufman or if you've heard of him, but he won The Voice not very long ago. His mother's name is Beth. I grew up with her,
Ah,
and it was her name that I used to name my character. She is a beautiful Christian woman who married a man who was a pastor of a church, and they're just doing a fabulous work. She writes and composes music, and like I said, I thought of her when I was writing Beth, but it is Tracy's story. Um, and I did that, like I said, because I didn't want to become a specter that would hurt people. I wanted this to be a salute, an effort of love.
please share with our listeners the era and the setting of the book.
Well, the era is right after Watergate, when President Ford rose to the presidency after Nixon resigned. And this is right between Jimmy Carter's election. And it's the 1970s, 1976. It was when music went into um, softer type of things, like with Philadelphia Freedom, and Olivia Newton-John was just rising, and also Barry Manilow's Mandy, and it was just before the disco era started. We were wearing bell bottoms at the time and polyester shirts, and um, girls started dressing up to go to nightclubs, and guys started to wear suits. And so it was an amazing era of change. It was that point between what they called kind of the hippie generation and the new generation of boomers. And drugs were prevalent. The big drug feed that was going on in the 60s had kind of subsided, but there was still pot, and cocaine was starting to emerge at the time. And it isn't until the 80s that cocaine would really became a problem, but it was starting to come. Kids were using fake IDs to get into clubs, and basically those kids were no different than what we see today, though at the time they couldn't tell you that. They'd say that they were different, but they're not. They had the same hangups and the same problems. But like I said, it was that twilight period between the 60s hippie generation and the 80s disco generation.
Now, your main character is Beth, who is the fictionalized Tracy Ross, and her friend Marjorie and their relationship. Give us a little bit about that background.
Well, Beth and Marjorie met each other when the Davises moved to Trenton in 1970. And they met each other while in school, and they came from basically the same type of economic background. Beth's father is a investment banker, and her mother is a real estate agent. And Marjorie's father is a surgeon, and her mother is a very beautiful trophy wife. And she's also a formerly college trained. She's a very smart woman. And so Beth and Marjorie suddenly realized, hey, we're best of friends. So they started doing everything together during junior high. And then in high school, they joined the cheerleading squad. Beth becomes the captain and Marjorie becomes the co-captain. And everything looks pretty good until Billy Paris moves to town. And Billy Paris is kind of the young power broker among the teens. He's got a flashy sports car. He dresses very elegantly and very richly, and he impresses a lot of girls with his bad boy image. Well, pretty soon, stories start to emerge that Billy Paris has made himself a little bit too friendly with some girls, and some girls, we believe, didn't appreciate what Billy Paris had done. So there is some questionable possibilities. Well, Marjorie is trying to make a name for herself. She's into the high school social club, and she's a rah-rah school spiriter, and she, like I said, is very impressed by Billy's wealth. And so she arranges to have a date with Billy Paris to go to a concert. Well, after the concert, they go back to Billy's house. Marjorie gets drunk, and Billy takes advantage of her. Well, the next day is a Sunday, and she goes over to her best friend Beth's house, and Beth is in the pool. They just gotten back from church. Beth is in the pool, kind of relaxing, and the Davises are having a pleasant Sunday. And well, when Marjorie gets there, Beth and Marjorie go up to her room, and Marjorie confesses to Beth that she went ahead and had sex with Billy. And she thinks, well, Beth is going to go, oh my, wow, that's incredible. That's awesome. Instead, Beth becomes upset and worried. And Marjorie says, why are you so upset? And Beth says, well, I just didn't think you'd give yourself so cheaply. And she says, what do you mean by that? She says, well, you had sex with Billy Paris. She says, well, I think I kind of love the guy. She says, no, you didn't love him. You're trying to make money is what you're trying to do. Well, that pretty much says it all. That Beth inadvertently called her friend a whore, and that's how the rift starts. So what happens from that time forward is that Beth and Marjorie realize that their friendship is really over. Now, Beth is saddened by that because she sees Marjorie becoming more involved with this guy, Billy Paris, and she knows it's going to end up with a flat tire broken down on the road. But she can't do anything because, the train wreck is coming. And so she has to just do the best she can. And so the rest of the book shows this struggle between Marjorie and Beth. And every time Marjorie tries to prove that she's the better person, she just ends up falling flat on her face.
Your book also shares the cautionary tales of corruption and bureaucracy that unfortunately still seem to plague us today. And I'm referring to Mr. Paris's father. Please give us some insight into the part this plays in your book and also what lessons we still have to learn today.
Well, if you can say that Beth has a devil, I guess we can probably say that his best protege is William Paris Sr. William Paris Sr. is a owner and director of a company called Paris Amalgamated Industries, which is a phosphate strip mining firm. And this is from an actual story that took place down in Florida, Sarasota, Florida, as a matter of fact, because of the fact that uh, the phosphate companies were coming in to Florida, finding a Beulah land of natural minerals. And what they were doing was they were strip mining wetlands, which, as we know, protect the environment and also protect us from severe storms and storm surge. Well, Paris doesn't care about that. All he wants to do is he just wants to make a whole bunch of money. Well, the thorn in his side is a journalist named Jim Nevelis. And as a matter of fact, I got that name from my grandfather, Jim Neville, who was a former county commissioner appointed by Reuben Askew at that time. And he was also an environmentalist. And he wrote several articles blasting the phosphate companies. And he was so effective that the phosphate companies actually tried to sue him for $7 million. Well, getting back to the story, William Paris is involved in this legal battle because of the fact that Jim Nevelis has been um, revealing to the people of Florida that this guy is just ruining the environment. And in order to make himself better, Paris and this man from Washington, the White House counsel, get together and they decide that Paris needs to improve his public image. So what he needs to do is he needs to show that he is actually the environmentalist Paris. He is the community Paris. And so he tries to dump a lot of blood money, basically, on charities in order to convince people that he's not the bad phosphate guy after all. Well, this comes in direct conflict with the people of the community because they know what he's trying to do. And during this time, he brings a group of Australian all-stars who are young baseball players between the ages of 16 to 19 to the United States, and he's touring them around, having them play baseball, and he's sponsoring all their activities and stuff. Well, he finally decides he wants the guys to have some companionship, and so he manages to corrupt the proceedings by basically pimping out the school's cheerleading squad. But of course, they're good girls. They're not going to, go in for any hanky panky. But he does that thinking that he's going to get away with it. And he decides he wants to use the homecoming queen. And so what he does is he maneuvers the committee that decides on the election use jimmied machines that will produce the candidate that he wants for homecoming queen, and they decide that it's going to be Marjorie. And that's also sponsored by his son, who at that time has lost Marjorie uh, due to his brutality. He wants her back, and so he wants to make her the homecoming queen. Well, to make a long story short, I'll let them read the book. What happens in the end is that Paris decides he's going to destroy the walkathon honoring Beth Davis unless Beth's father accepts a donation of $35,000 from him that will make him look better in the eyes of the Trenton community. Well, Beth's father refuses. And so he gets together with his White House counsel named Gary Burgoyne. And the president is scheduled to visit Trenton that very day. And he's going to be going down that route. And so he tries to end the walkathon. But the kids themselves decide they're going to go ahead and do it. And there's just mud in Paris's face. There's nothing that he can do. 1,000 kids decide to march. You can't arrest them all. And so Paris is really shown up for the heel that he really is. So, like
again,
I said, if they'll read the book.
it's a parable, basically, of good overcoming evil. And that's really a theme that we really need to look at today. My guest is Jeffery Young. His book, Beth, Legacy of Love. We'll be back with more after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week is Jeffery Young. We're talking about his book, Beth, Legacy of Love. Jeff, in your book, you have a parable about the black widow spider and the butterfly. How does that relate to Beth's story?
Well, it's really incredible because of the fact that when I first decided to write this book, I didn't really think that it was going to be a book. I had envisioned a 8-page tract. It really didn't seem like it was going to be much at all. I'd never written anything longer than about a 4-page report. I think that the last thing I had written was a little snippet called Pretty Girls and Other Scary Monsters. So I had never really written an elongated piece of fiction. And so I started writing this thing, and it was terrible. The start was just horrible because I was going to go from birth, and at that time I was a young man. I'd never seen a baby being born. I knew nothing of stirrups and the whole 9 yards. And so trying to describe this thing was a disaster. It really was. And the book was going absolutely nowhere. And I realized that. And I just prayed to the Lord. I said, Lord, I know you want me to write this thing, but where do I start? And a voice inside of me said, call Mom. And I'm thinking, call my mother? My mother, she wouldn't know how to start this book. And I said, no, call Mom. And suddenly I got in my head to call the Rosses, Tracy's parents. And I did. I called them up out of the blue. It was raining outside. Her father answered, and I said, "Hello, Mr. Ross. You don't know me. My name is Jeffery Young, and I'd like to meet with you and talk to you about a project I'm putting together. I was a friend of your daughter's." And then that was all I needed to say, was I was a friend of his daughter's. And he said, "Sure, I'd love to meet with you. When would you like to get together?" And I said, "Would you mind getting together now?" And he said, "No, that's fine." So I went over to their house and we talked, and I got some wonderful clarity, but I still didn't know where to start the book. Well, anyway, as I was leaving, I looked down on the ground and there was a pair of butterfly wings. And there was a spider's web just above it and a rose bush. And suddenly a thought came, there it is. That's my start right there. And so I collected those wings, and I have those wings today, as a matter of fact. They've survived 40 years. And that's how my book got started, because one of the very first scenes is Beth going over to her friend's house, and she sees this spider. But, you know, in the wider sense, the spider represents all the forces in our lives that connect us together with things that aren't good, with things that are destructive, because at the end, the spider's going to bite you and eat you. And so I had that as part of a way to foreshadow Beth finally getting sick with that terrible spinal meningitis and dying, and she's the butterfly. But also there was the lie. Marjorie knew that Billy's dad had rigged all those voting machines that made her homecoming queen, and her conscience was just killing her. It really was. It was really just tearing her apart. Well, it gets to a point where Marjorie finally decides that she needs to make a change in her life. And she gets a hold of some Jesus people that she knows, and they talk to her about Christ and about having a relationship. And she changes. She doesn't understand it. She doesn't know why. It's just something that she feels inside. Well, when she meets the President of the United States, she's up on the platform, and Beth has already died. Marjorie has become the new captain of the cheerleaders, and so she gets to speak for the squad. Well, she tells the president that really there's another person that deserves to be there, but she died, and so she's going to speak for her. And she admits before that entire audience that the machines were rigged, that Beth actually had won the contest, and it was her crown, not Marjorie's. And suddenly, when she does that, a bouquet of roses that she'd been handed, butterfly flies out from the bouquet, and a spider falls out the bottom dead. And the president looks down and he goes, "Oh, I wonder if there's anything else in there." But Marjorie knows what it is. Her lie died.
Mm. Mm. Her honesty was rewarded.
That's it. She was free.
She was
like
free.
That butterfly.
Absolutely. How may high school age readers in this era of COVID and virtual classrooms relate to this story?
You know, I tell you, I'm glad you asked that question. That that's really one I can't tell you. I am very worried about this generation, the one that they call the snowflake generation, because I believe that in the political climate of progressivism and of democratic liberalism, I honestly believe, not trying to sound partisan, but I honestly believe that young people today are being misled, and it's taking them away from religion, away from Christ, away from hope. And I think that a lot of them, if they get my book, they'll probably use pages for rolling paper or the book itself to prop up tables that have a wobble, or they might not get it at all. And I am worried for them. For me, it doesn't matter if I sell one book today. Just the Rosses themselves, when they said that I gave back their daughter, and some of the other responses that I've gotten from some people. One reviewer said it was a powerful book with a great message. And, if I can just reach a few people for the message, and the Rosses themselves say they give the scholarship. They present it to the winner every year. And they told me that they were going to add a copy of my book to the prize, and that everyone who qualified for the scholarship would be getting a copy of my book. And to me, that's reward enough. I would hope that young people would want to read this. For one thing, they'll realize that their parents really aren't that different from them, and that they ought to start talking to their parents about the things that they're feeling, about the things that are bothering them and that are confusing them, because their parents know. They understand what's going on. I've got two boys myself, and when they were little, they looked at me like, "Boy, Daddy is the dumbest person on the earth." But now that they've grown up, they say, "Boy, Dad, you sure learned a lot." That's paraphrasing Mark Twain. Please don't let his ancestors sue me for plagiarism.
No, no, not at all. And the message is, and I think that's the most important message, that if we're going to return to a society and world with compassion and kindness and love, we have to start the conversation, and we have to start it now. That's really what it's about.
We have to start it with our kids.
Yep.
We got to talk to them, because they're the ones that are out on the street. They're the ones that are setting fire to buildings. They're the ones who are angry. And we got to talk to them. We got to say, "Look, kids, first of all, you're loved. Second of all, this world that you're trying to burn down is your world. This is where you got to live. And it's going to be your responsibility to fix it." The ending of my book, I think, really says it all, because the moral of the story is to live every day for what it is, and to just try to get the most out of life that you can. And this actually happened. While I was writing the book, I had an opportunity to take Mr. Ross, Tracy's dad, aside, and I wanted to get something from him that he could probably tell me that would really set my book, off and give it the final zinger. And he delivered. I asked him, I said, "Mr. Ross, after all the things that Tracy did and what she meant to people, and all the honors that she's been given, both, before and after her passing, what is it most that you remember about your daughter?" And he said, "I think it's the quiet things that's what I remember the most, the quiet things. And what he meant by that was he meant those times when sometimes you look at your kid and you see yourself in them and you don't say anything, and they don't even know you're looking at them. But that's the time that you remember the most. It's that pretty postcard of those times when you got to be together and when you were eating ice cream together, or maybe going to the store together, or maybe riding in the car together. That's what kids need. They need to know that. They got to hear that from their parents, and their parents have got to tell them.
His book is called Beth, A Legacy of Love. Jeffery Young, please tell our listeners one more time where they can get your book and find out more about you.
Well, they can get it at iTunes, Kindle. They can get it at Amazon.com. See, and I just want them to feel the love. I want them to have that legacy of love.
Jeff, thank you so much for sharing that beautiful message and for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure I won't forget.
And thank you for joining us on Vox Novus. I'm Victor the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.